Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give folks a chance to get in. So we plan to get started in about another minute or so. But we're so happy to have you all on this webinar. Please, in the chat box, tell us where you're from. Okay, we have some Southern Arizona, Texas, Missouri, Virginia. That's my home state, Virginia. We have some from Ohio, Pennsylvania. Oh, it's going pretty fast, but I think I saw Wichita, San Diego. I would love to be out there on the beach right now. Okay, well, we have about a little over 200 people that have joined us so far. We're expecting to have a couple of hundred, possibly 400 to 500. So we'll see. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Can you go back one slide, Michelle? So the webinar is entitled Food Safety for Everyone, Building Inclusive Messages. We can go to the next slide. Hello, welcome from the Partnership for Food Safety Education. My name is Shantae Loetti, and I am the Communications Associate for the partnership, and today I will be the moderator for this webinar. So this is a quick snapshot of today's lineup. We'll do the welcome and housekeeping from me. Then we'll get right into the importance of inclusion and basic concepts with the consumer reports. Then CDC will share some recent research and their findings. Then we'll go to Barbara Chamberlin with New Mexico State, and she will talk about inclusivity in graphics and videos. And then after that, we'll have hopefully about a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session with the speakers. Excuse me, my allergies are acting up today. So for housekeeping, we'd love you all to join the chat. And that's, it should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you have any questions during the webinar, you're welcome to enter those questions in the Q&A box. So you should see on your screen a chat box, and then you should see a questions and answers box. So put your questions in the questions and answers box. After the webinar, you'll receive a brief survey from us. Please complete it because it will help us to improve. So everyone wants to know about continuing education units. So you will receive 1 hour of CEU from ANFP, CDR, NCHEC, and NEHA. So if you look in the chat box on the right, you should see a PDF so you can download the certificates now. But if you miss it or can't find it, don't worry. You'll receive a follow-up email from us tomorrow. Also, either tomorrow or by the end of the day tomorrow, you'll be able to access a recording of the webinar and all the CEUs on our website. And just a reminder that educators who are seeking NCHEC credits must complete an online questionnaire by Tuesday, October 17th. So a little about the partnership. We are an active network of about 13,000 health and food safety educators. We have about 40 partner organizations that help us with our work. And we also have a close relationship with our federal liaisons, and that's the CDC, FDA, and USDA. And we all work together to advance trusted, consistent, science-based behavioral health messaging. So many of you are probably aware that every year in the United States, 1 in 6 people, and that's 48 million people, get sick from foodborne illness, commonly known as food poisoning. About 128,000 of those folks are hospitalized, and unfortunately, 3,000 people die from eating contaminated food. So following simple food safety steps can help prevent foodborne illness and the spread of germs. So before we get started, we're going to take a quick poll. So this is the first poll question. And the question is, does your organization workplace currently have any policies to help promote DEI? So just take a few moments more. We'll give it a few more seconds here to let you answer the poll question. Okay, so we can end the poll and we can see the results. So 45% say yes, you do have several policies. 32% says yes, some policies. 5% say no, and 17% say I'm not sure, maybe. Okay, well, that information is good to know because you'll learn about these topics today, a little about these topics today, and then you'll be able to share them with your colleagues. So our first speaker, I'm going to briefly introduce him. His name is James Rogers, and he is the Director of Food Safety Research and Testing at Consumer Reports. He is responsible for leading the food safety and sustainability operations of the organization, including food testing, data analysis, and risk and safety assessments. As acting head of product safety testing, he also oversees the team that assesses safe operation and use of consumer products. We're so happy to have you with us, Jim, and you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Shantae, and thank you for that great introduction. Next slide, please. I want to thank the partnership for the invitation and ability to speak to you. And I also want to note the support from my small but diverse and energetic staff at Consumer Reports. In our invite, it mentioned how diverse that the United States population has become. I include the slide here of US Census data to confirm that, but also to note in the last line about how knowing what the demographic data says of how our population is changing can also inform our policies and programs nationwide. Since we talk about food safety as a policy and as a program, it is important to note that our country is becoming much more diverse, and we're here today to talk about how some of that messaging, which is the efforts of the partnership and many on this call, are to get that food safety information out in a way that's understandable, but also usable by the population. Next slide. So who is Consumer Reports? And I'm using this as a touch point because I think our story helps understand some of the changes and some of the adaptations that we had to do in order to get our food messaging out. Consumer Reports is an 85-year-old organization that has been looking at product and food safety for a very long time. We do use science-based food safety research and testing to actually convey a food safety message to consumers. So we do test at retail, and we provide information to consumers on the food safety system. Now, being 85 years old, Consumer Reports had a certain way of doing things and getting this information out. Next slide, please. So in the far left up corner is a picture of a magazine cover that we did on safety of leafy greens. I include this as our touch point because for 85 years, we have published a magazine that would convey the results of our testing. However, as you might have noticed, magazines are not read very much. In fact, the demographics of magazine readers tends to be white, male, older, and of a certain income level. As we were discussing, that does not fit the entire demographic of the United States, especially these days. So things had to change. So we would take our messaging of this is what we did, this is what we found, this is how it could affect you, and this is what you can do about it, including in the magazine, because we do publish a magazine, but we would go to social media. So in the top middle, you see Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok. We do all of those in various types and variations of using of social media. We do video where we actually send out to different news channels. We used to do a TV show, but it did not give us what we needed to do for food safety messaging. So we stopped the TV show. We do interviews on national TV, which could lead to more social media, but we also do scientific presentations and publications. Each of these are an entry point into getting our food safety messaging out to the population. So for instance, while you may think for scientific presentations and publications are the big, large meetings or peer-reviewed journals, I've also presented our food safety program to Florida A&M University, a historically Black college and university, in order to distribute our information to them. So as you can see, there are a number of opportunities that we as food safety experts and educators can use to get the information out. And other speakers will give you some more details about how this is done within their agency or within their groups. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about some general principles, and I have to say that these are mine. These are my learnings as the Director of Food Safety at Consumer Reports that have occurred over the 8.5 years that I've been with Consumer Reports. I've had to go from a bench scientist to a project lead to the person who usually speaks on food and water safety for the organization. And these are some of the things I've learned all along the way. So the first one is that you have to have images that address the areas and the consumers that you're trying to reach for these messages. We like to see people that look like us. So your media, whether it's graphics or videos, they need to see people that look like them. There are also times that you have to use specific graphics and specific pictures and specific videos for a targeted audience. For instance, when we tested spices, we made sure that we would test spices that would be used in the Hispanic community. And when we did the messaging, we also translated our reports into Spanish, but we also used Hispanic images in our information conveyance to that population. Point two, always consider that the multicultural population may have certain language needs. As I just mentioned, we translate all of our stories into Spanish. We've also explored the possibility of translating our stories into French or Arabic because of the increase in immigration from those areas of the world. We also have to be aware that you have to write at an appropriate level when writing is appropriate. What I mean by that is that most studies that I've seen say that in general, for the general population, you have to write at about an 8th grade reading level. But again, when you have a population that may have English as a second language or know zero English at all, maybe writing doesn't convey your message, but images do. For the third point, you need to have a diverse group of people presenting your messages in videos and graphics, etc. I have a very diverse team that can take some of the load of the presentations. We've all had media training, which I urge that you have your presenters take in order to convey the information clearly and in a way that your audience can understand. I've even taken advanced media training to prepare me for some of the conversations I have on television and radio. Next slide, please. Please avoid the rising tide lifts all boats philosophy. I've heard this from many marketing experts that, for instance, if you increase your market share by 10%, it will be inclusive of all these other groups. I'm not sure the data really proves that. A one size fits all for messaging, while maybe supported by some of those in communications and marketing, it's been my experience that that is not true. The second point on this slide is engaging social and cultural centers of power. So in the Black community, what I've tried to do is convince Consumer Reports that we need to reach out to those places where Black social, cultural power actually resides. So that would include the Black church. So for instance, what about doing a high blood pressure screening where you talk about different high blood pressure measurement devices in a Black church setting? Include outreach to the Divine Nine. That is the Black fraternities and sororities that have not only a lot of economic power, but a lot of influence within their groups. And then interacting with community groups to convey a food safety message, because many times these community groups are the heartbeat of a community, know who to talk to, know how the messaging would resonate, have suggestions as to how to make your messaging resonate even better within those communities. And this would go for other communities also. Leverage social media. Social media experts tend to be younger. In fact, when we do social media, I run anything that I do through my 21-year-old son, who calls himself an expert. But just to get feedback on how I speak, what the background looks like, any music that's being used. But also, if you're hiring social media experts, they tend to be younger too. And so we can't discount if they don't have a lot of experience in work or whatever, but they are the experts out there. Depending on the platform, your audience will be younger also. As I mentioned, magazines skew older. Social media tends to skew younger. Now that's okay, because many people and a number of studies have cited that the younger the audience, they tend to get their food safety information from social media, not from the USDA or FDA websites or CDC websites. They tend to go to social media first and then go over to those other sites. And again, include diversity in all your offerings that you have in social media. Next slide, please. And why this is important, here's a study out of Ireland that talks about how if you really want to address the changing communication landscape, you have to be willing to freely adopt social media and use it effectively. So it will be the stakeholders that adapt to this new reality that will most likely be the more effective in getting a safe food safety message out to the communities that they're trying to reach. Next slide, please. Now, that does not mean that traditional media doesn't work. You see that guy on the right who was giving an interview about the E. coli outbreak, possibly tied to Wendy's hamburgers. While traditional media does tend to skew older. It was my experience that traditional media, especially television, was like one of the best places to find COVID information during the COVID pandemic. So traditional media can be useful. Again, except that it skews older, but it can also lead people to other information if that experience on television, for instance, leads to adding websites, links, and other information. Next slide, please. The use of influencers has shown to be very important. On the right is a picture of me presenting to a group called the Mommy Bloggers for Consumer Reports. I was presenting about heavy metals in baby foods, some testing we had done. This was a very diverse group of moms in the New York City area that then would blog about different food safety, food nutrition, baby safety, car seats, strollers, etc., in conjunction with Consumer Reports and Consumer Reports testing. What you see is that on the slide, my last slide said, what are you concerned about? And we did a poll of these mommy bloggers. And as you can see on the left-hand side, point number one was the most important thing that they wanted to do in the survey is to learn more about how people get sick from food. This would present a great opportunity to interact with people that are out there on the web and are influencers with this food safety messaging that we generated from Consumer Reports. The other thing is that there is enough bad information out there from influencers who really don't know that much about food and food safety and nutrition. And it's great to counter this bad information out there with good influencers, good information that can really help the community. Next slide, please. And I think some of the other presenters will talk about this, but we ran into this cultural differences ourselves with our messaging about don't wash your chicken. So we did a campaign, and that guy on the left talked about 5 things I would not do as a food safety expert on social media. One of them was not to wash your chicken. We had extreme pushback from various communities, especially in the Black, Caribbean, and Latino community that said, my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, everybody washes their chicken before they cook it. So much so that a lot of the messaging was rejected. It did not resonate with these communities. And in fact, they started negotiating with us in our messaging about alternatives, such as, well, what if I don't wash it in the sink, but put it in a pot of vinegar water? Well, then you have a pot of vinegar water plus salmonella to get rid of. So that really doesn't accomplish a whole lot. And so we have to accept that sometimes our messaging, which is based on science, based on experience, the best information we have, just will not go over well with these different cultures, just because there are cultural differences. Maybe there's another way to address this or et cetera, but we just know that this is a potential problem that we have to face when we do our messaging. Next slide, please. So as I close, this will be my last slide. Food safety education is important and will be more important in the future. One of the reasons that stood out in some of my most recent readings is as we're dealing with climate change, there are some studies, this study was from Germany and reported in Food Safety News, that they expect an increase in foodborne infections and intoxications in Germany. And that's probably worldwide, because as climate changes, what we're facing as consumers and as a community will probably change too. And so the last quote I'm going to refer to is multicultural marketing is needed to grow a brand. This is from Courtney Couch. She does a lot of marketing and with stars and athletes and so on and so forth. Our brand is food safety. Our brand is food safety communication. If we want to grow our brand, which is growing the conveyance of this information to these communities, we have to include multicultural marketing upfront. It can't be an add-on at the back. It really should be planned for. A strategy should be developed upfront as you're planning for your different programming in order to reach these communities. And so I thank you for listening, and I look forward to any of your questions toward the end.
Thank you so much, Jim. We really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm sure there will be several questions coming up for you towards the end of the webinar. So next, we're going to move into our next set of speakers. I will briefly introduce them. So today we have with us Kelsey Schwarz, and she is a health communication specialist in the Division of Foodborne, Waterborne, and Environmental Diseases at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where she has worked since 2016. Since 2021, Kelsey has managed the Consumer Food Safety Portfolio for CDC, co-managed foodsafety.gov, and worked in partnership with the Partnership for Food Safety Education, FDA, and USDA. She holds a Ph.D. in sociology from Georgia State University with concentrations in health and family. And with her, we have Sara Bresee. Sara is also a health communication specialist in the Division of Foodborne, Waterborne, and Environmental Diseases at the CDC, and has been working in communication science and implementation for over a decade. She received her master's in public health from Emory University in behavioral sciences and health education, and she is the current communication research lead for the division. We thank you so much for joining us, Kelsey and Sara.
Thank you so much, Shante. Excuse me. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning for folks that are in a different time zone than us. Today, Kelsey and I are going to be talking about some of our research that we've done and how we've used mixed method data to create tailored consumer food safety education content. Next slide. So I know that many folks on this call are very familiar with the demographics of interest. We really like to focus our content on people at higher risk for severe food poisoning. But we also, of late, the past few years, have been trying to put a health equity lens over our work and focusing on race, socioeconomic status, and geographic location when we're looking into our data. Next slide. So these are the methods that we've employed over the past few years. We've done qualitative research, and you can also see that the research that we did last summer, we conducted several focus groups with Black, Hispanic, Latino individuals, caregivers, et cetera, and really had a health equity lens and focused as well on lower income and people who live in food deserts. We also done quantitative surveys, and we do literature reviews, environmental scans. We look at our performance metrics, and then we try to synthesize our data to really create a holistic picture and assess our audiences from multiple angles. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit quickly about some of the overarching communication material feedback that we've received across all audiences. And this kind of echoes back to what we heard before, that people prefer real images. They also prefer real images and modern graphics. And the graphics really need to reflect the severity of illness. And for example, we had some images that showed people smiling when we were talking about more serious topics. So just being cognizant of that. People like to see diversity. They like to see themselves. They don't like things that are fear-mongering or, and there's also misperceptions or different interpretations around statistics. So also being mindful when you're when you're writing statistics on your, sorry, we're writing statistics to make sure that people really understand them and are interpreting the way that you want them to. We also saw that our verbiage and different language that we were using was being understood differently. For example, the term cross-contamination, poultry, words like that, people weren't really understanding. Next slide. Some specific results that we saw per audience were, so caregivers to children under the age of 5 really like empowering images. They also aren't often thinking about food safety. This is a very busy population. So they don't always have time to take action or prioritize it, and they're not even aware often about the severity of foodborne illness in children. Older adults are really resistant to food safety messages that give directives. So for example, things that say like, do not do this. They don't like that it feels paternalistic, and they really prefer empowerment and choices. This is an audience that has years of experience, and so they often think that their knowledge is that the way they've been doing things is correct. Excuse me. And there was also a low lack of knowledge that the perception that foodborne illness and food poisoning may increase with age. That was also something we saw, that there was a lack of that perception. Pregnant individuals are hyper alert and actively seek out food safety information, and they really want as much information as possible as they can, but tailored in a way that doesn't increase their anxiety and is realistic. Next slide, please. So we also, like I mentioned earlier, spoke to Black and Hispanic people as well. We saw here that message receptivity was really high when discussing things about like ensuring loved one's safety. However, there was a barrier, and this also could be perceived as a facilitator. There was a heavy reliance on family practices around food safety. Hispanic and Latino participants noted that they really liked seeing diverse imagery of themselves. However, they didn't like when food was discussed as being Hispanic. For example, using the term Hispanic soft cheeses, that term did not test well. People found that offensive. We also, when discussing food safety recommendations with lower income or people that live in food deserts, that often a call to action is we ask people to throw their food out. Well, people did not. Food waste did not really resonate well with these audiences, and you can see that in the quote on your right. Next slide. So one behavior that we know that we do not want people to do is we don't want them to leave their food out longer than 2 hours. And in our focus groups, we saw that Hispanic Latino participants were reporting that their family would leave food sitting out for longer periods of time. So we decided to explore that quantitatively. And we found that when compared with the general population versus Hispanic population in representative surveys, that 9% of the general population reports this behavior, but 20% of the Hispanic population. And looking further, we noted that people of color were 2 to 4 times more likely to report leaving food out longer than 2 hours. So this really shows that the messages that we're trying to disseminate aren't really reaching the populations that we need them to reach. Next slide, please. Hand washing at key times was also something that we explored further. We saw that parents to children under the age of 5 were more likely to say that they didn't wash hands before prepping food than non-parents. We also saw that men, people of color, were more likely to say that they didn't wash their hands after handling raw meat or chicken. Next slide, please. Food thermometer use, this is also a behavior of interest for us, and it's pretty well known with FDA data that food thermometer use increases with income, the likelihood someone owns a food thermometer. Also, white individuals are more likely to own a food thermometer, and older individuals, so people over the age of 65, are far more likely to own a food thermometer than younger individuals. And so we decided to explore this a little bit more, and we saw when speaking to participants that many prefer using visual cues. Even older adults that own food thermometers said that they preferred using visual cues. A lot of people reported only using them during holidays. So for example, when you're cooking your turkey, And many reported not owning it, finding it inconvenient, not knowing how to use it properly. And you can see this on the quote on your right, that someone that lives in a food desert reported out that he just prefers to eyeball his meat. Next slide. We also talked about chicken washing, which is always a hot topic in food safety. So we know that this is a very common behavior. 83% of Americans report doing this behavior, and this has been consistent over the past decade with FDA data as well. And we know that gender, age, and race are significant predictors of this behavior. We decided to explore this a little bit more qualitatively, and we found that this was a culturally significant behavior, and that messages like saying "do not wash something" came across as very offensive. So we tested some messages looking at a harm reduction message, and also a message that was basically just saying how many people do this behavior and that it wasn't safe. And we found that the harm reduction message performed better in the sense that it garnered fewer negative comments and had less misinformation in the comments when we tested it. Next slide, please. We also, and finally, my final slide is I'm going to talk about social determinants. It's very, very important to be cognizant of this when you are creating messages. And so in our research, we saw that income and affordability in the literature, and also in perception from our focus groups, that foods that are in lower income neighborhoods are more likely to contain pathogens and not be as safe. And we saw that the people perceive this as well. Time has a major impact on people's ability to actually do food safety behaviors. We know that if somebody is working a really long job, or they're a parent, they might not necessarily be thinking top of mind, oh, I need to make sure I'm testing getting the temperature of my food. And that culture is something we always need to be mindful of when we're creating messages. And that we saw that culture had a deep, deep impact on how people actually actually performed food safety practices. And now Kelsey's going to talk a little bit about how we have applied the data. Thank you.
So I'm going to mention a few of the ways that we've already implemented some of these findings. Next slide, please. So from our research, we learned a lot about what key food safety behaviors people are likely to participate in. And when we first started implementing things from our research findings, we focused on prioritizing messages about prevention behaviors that our participants were less likely to do. And we were doing that to help better educate our audience about the risk involved if they are not participating in these behaviors. And so since some of the populations reported leaving food out longer than the recommended 2 hours, we've developed messages that focus on this key prevention strategy. And on the slide now, you see one of those videos playing, and that's an example about a person who's getting sick from holiday food that's been left out too long. And it shows how the bacteria can start to grow on the food when it's left out too long. And then in turn, as you're seeing right now, the man got sick. This led to illness. And on the other part of the slide, you see just one of our static screenshots from social media that we use this video for. Next slide. Thanks. And so we've continued to create messages on this topic. And here are 2 of our newest ones related to this. So they're both giving detailed information about either how to properly chill cooked foods or why it's important to chill perishables promptly. And those are going out during our summer series. So you might have actually seen 1 or 2 of these already online. Next slide. As Sara mentioned, we also found that some groups, like parents of young children, were less likely to report washing their hands when in the kitchen. And so we created new messages about this specific prevention strategy to remind our audience and this target audience about this key food safety step. And again, that first image that you see is a social media post, and that is part of our Summer of Food Safety series. Next slide. So related to food thermometer use and making sure food is cooked to a safe internal temperature, participants appeared to be most willing to consider using a food thermometer in specific cooking situations. So specific occasions like Thanksgiving or other holidays, when cooking meats that have never been cooked before or that they've rarely cooked before, or when preparing food for large groups of people like their family and friends. And so we've used the holiday season when people are tending to cook more or possibly cooking meats that they're not used to cooking as a chance to push this food thermometer messaging related to these specific cooking situations. And many participants also reported, as Sara mentioned, using visual cues to see if meat was done rather than using a food thermometer. And so we've created messages to highlight how color and texture of food is not a good indicator that it's completely done. And you can see that in the grilling post that's on the slide right now. And you can go to the next, please. Participants also referenced various barriers to using a food thermometer, and one of those was not knowing how to properly use the food thermometer, like where exactly to place it, especially in larger meat products like a whole turkey. And so we consulted with USDA's FSIS to create detailed instructions, and then we at CDC made side-by-side graphics and a GIF that you see both of those on the slide right now about proper food thermometer placement for whole turkeys. And this is on our website on our turkey feature page. And we were able to promote it ahead of the last Thanksgiving and plan to promote it again ahead of this Thanksgiving. Next slide. So as has been mentioned twice already, related to chicken washing, we received feedback from study participants who were more likely to report washing their chicken, that they would like to see harm reduction content instead of just seeing messaging about how they should not wash chicken. And so we're continuing to develop new messaging that informs people about the risk of washing chicken and other poultry, but also supplying them with the safest method of doing so if they are unlikely to change their behavior and instead are preferring to wash their chicken and other poultry. And that the harm reduction messaging that we are using now is what's highlighted on the screen for you. And next to it is the social media post that Sara mentioned. This was part of our A/B testing. And this was the one particularly related to harm reduction. And it performed really well. This compared to our other social media post that was in the A/B testing that just had the more normal information that we put out previously about how chicken washing is a risky behavior. This one that you're seeing on the screen with the harm reduction messaging had much less negative comments and much less spread of misinformation within the comments. And we also learned when discussing behaviors to avoid that it's best to not show people actually doing that behavior. So previously we've had images where people were washing a chicken and then there was an X over it or something to indicate that this is happening and you're not supposed to do it. And we've learned that we don't want to demonstrate a behavior that we're actually advising against. So instead, as you see in the social media post on the screen, we're showing cooked chicken or chicken that's being cooked in our messaging that's advising against washing chicken before the cooking step. Next slide. And through our research, we found that caregivers like empowering messages and text. And so we're focusing our messaging this summer, as I mentioned, on reaching parents to inform them about how to protect their children from foodborne illness. And as I'm sure most of you know, foodborne illness does tend to increase during the summer months. So we thought it was an ideal time to reach out to parents and push some of this messaging. Next slide. Again, Sara mentioned that Black research participants liked messaging focusing on ensuring loved ones' safety. And so we have, and we will continue to develop messaging that focuses on this key motivator for safe food handling practices. So we're not only trying to address barriers, but we're trying to optimize some of these key motivators that we found in our research. Next slide. And Michelle, for this one, you can just click once or twice actually, and then hold for right now. Thank you. And so our Hispanic Latino population, or excuse me, our Hispanic Latino participants appreciated graphics reflecting the diversity of their population. And so we've continued to show diversity within this population. And now you can click twice more and show the newer graphics. Oh, I like the animation. Thank you. And so we've updated our graphics. As you can see, they're more modern. And they're matching the seriousness of the tone, as Sara mentioned. So to do that, we included people who are not smiling. Something as seemingly small as having the the illustrated people smiling on the older graphics really turned people off in our message testing. And so they thought that it did not reflect the seriousness of the tone of speaking about listeria infections, and some of our other ones were speaking about E. coli and salmonella. And so our newer illustrated people are not smiling, and we're still representing the diversity within group. Next slide, please. And you can click, you can go just kind of click through these. Yeah, thank you. And so based on feedback from multiple groups that wanted risk information for commonly eaten foods, as much information about safe foods as possible and choices instead of directives, we've created tables for all of our groups, people that are at higher risk for foodborne illness, that show their riskier foods and their safer alternatives. And this is hot off the presses. It just went online yesterday. And we have these on our website, housed on our website, and we're also going to be pushing them through social media during Food Safety Education Month next month. And we have them linked to some of our pages that give a little bit more detailed information about high-risk groups so that individuals who might fit into those groups know exactly why and what their risk is for foodborne illness. Next slide. So you can just click twice and that'll be good for now. Thank you. So finally, as Sara mentioned, we tested a number of food safety materials that relied heavily on cartoon style illustrations of both people and food previously. And so on the slide right now, you see some of the food safety graphics that were created prior to our research beginning. And from our research, we know that real images of people and food are preferred to illustrations of people and food. And so you can go ahead and click twice now if you don't mind. We've created a new series of graphics on avoiding cross-contamination that use stock images of people and food layered over an illustrated background, and you can see those right now on the screen. And this gave the feel of a real life scenario, but it was more eye-catching and unique than just using a standard stock image. Additionally, we've struggled quite a bit with finding stock images that have people showing people performing food safety activities properly in their kitchen. So this is kind of a nice alternative where you can take bits and pieces from different stock images and overlay them on top of each other so that you're adequately showing proper food safety in the kitchen. And so as you've seen from the examples throughout this presentation, we've been using images of real people and real food whenever possible. And we plan to continue developing materials in this style moving forward. So Sara and I are glad that we were able to share our research with you and how we've updated some of our communications materials. And after the last presentation, we're happy to answer any questions that you all have. Or if you go to the next slide, I believe it has our email addresses on it. So feel free to reach out to either of us if there's not enough time to ask your question today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey and Sara. And yes, we are already receiving questions for you all. So before we get into our last presentation, we're going to do another quick poll question. So the poll question says, how often do you make videos about food safety? All the time, often, sometimes, rarely, or never? So we're just going to give you all a few more seconds to participate in the poll. Okay, it looks like we still have a few more people trying to get their answer in. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll in 3 seconds. All right. So let's look at these poll answers. So 59% of the participants on this webinar have never made a food safety video. Let's see. Then we have a rarely at 23%. We have sometimes at 14%, and we have 4% all the time and often. So those are some wonderful data that we have collected, and you all will learn a lot more about creating videos and resources in our next presentation coming up now. So with us today, we also have Barbara Chamberlin. And Barb directs the Innovative Media Research and Extension Department at New Mexico State University, where they create educational tools for a wide variety of content and audiences. For example, they are working on virtual reality programs for a national park, have completed child development apps for toddlers, games on financial literacy and math, and they have created an incredible collection of learning tools related to food safety. Their research includes diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and they are working on frameworks to help other developers make these processes more manageable and better integrated with production. So we welcome Barb. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Chantal. Yeah, hello everybody. So for those 10 of you who do videos all the time, awesome, you could probably get this presentation. And for those of you who don't worry, this isn't really just about videos and graphics, but I want to share what we have learned about creating inclusive design based on all of the work that we do. Next, please. I have to say first, this is not just my presentation. Everything I do, all my guiding principles, the research, the frameworks that we have is informed by our production studio. We have a full team of production studio just on the other side of my wall here of professional artists, animators, video producers, educational designers. And we also have a team of researchers that look into research in several areas, and in this case, inclusive design. So in full giving credit where credit's due, it's all of us that have created these guidelines that continue to evolve. Next. Our shop, as she mentioned, is a production shop. So everything we do at New Mexico State University, part of the Cooperative Extension Service, is research-based education, whether it's VR, apps, animation, games, that sort of thing. And we do a lot of food safety. In fact, part of what I'm going to share, we've done in partnership with the Partnership for Food Safety Education. Next. Okay, so one of those projects, for example, all about microgreens, just social media campaigns. So this is interesting because the issues we're dealing with are not drawn images, but photos, videos. So we're thinking not only about how our messages are created, but the hands we create, what the hands we choose to show, or interviews we choose to show in the people that we're working with. Next. One of our other projects, we started working on the chicken issue. This is about, 13 years ago. And this was one of our more culturally informed campaigns where we went to specific groups of people to help us. What generates your thinking about this? What kinds of recipes are you cooking? What do you think is the problem to be solved? And this campaign was beautiful and we loved it, and it did not move the needle as we wanted it to. So we did a second round recently. And one of the things that I don't hear discussed around chicken a lot is in our most recent round, we did some research into who are we reaching out there when it comes to chicken washing. And one group, we are never going to change their minds. We found that one group was set. There was no way, no how we were going to change them. So we said, okay, we're going to let them sit there. And then we had one group who already knows not to wash their chicken. And then we have one group that all we have to say is, we recommend you don't wash their chicken. They'll be like, don't wash your chicken. Okay, got it, good. That's not our target audience either. But our sweet spot was an audience who was like, wait, hold up. I've been told I shouldn't. Wait, tell me more. And that's who we were trying to address in our most recent Don't Wash Your Poultry campaign. Next. We also do a series of games. And so this is an example of one of our games where we're talking about, from a representation standpoint, our drawn or our created characters, and also how we communicate things visually, not just by telling people things, by letting them draw inferences, such as our scoreboard on this, which was low risk, high risk. Next. Okay, I like to refer to this kind of talk as the do better talk, because one of the things I think is important for all of us as educators, as we strive to be more inclusive about our education, is, in the words of Maya Angelou, you are going to do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. Our understanding, our approach, our knowledge, our research methods, they all continue to evolve in this. So we are all going to just do the best we can. We're going to stay in touch with each other. We're going to stay in touch with this as a research area, as a development area. And then we're going to be forgiving of ourselves when we get it wrong. And we're going to just strive to do better when we know better. Next. Okay, so an example of that is Ninja Kitchen, a cooking game we produced over 10 years ago, spectacularly successful, high use rates, very popular. The research impact showed that we were actually moving the needle on what middle schoolers knew about food safety as they were learning to cook. It went offline when the software Flash was discontinued, and it wasn't accessible anymore. So we received some funding from the Extension Foundation to redo it, which is good, because we needed to have change some things. The first was cultural appropriation. A lot of people look at this and say, I don't understand. Next, please. I don't understand. What is it that needs to be fixed? So I'll just give it a little decompress of some of the things we wanted to change in the game. The first is the images and the representation we saw online. Even the way the logo Ninja Kitchen is written is in a font that in some circles is considered to be a racist font. That's strong language, and I know that. But the concern here is that we are diminishing an entire culture, an entire population based on a font that is used in food packaging. And so we're saying everything about a given population can be reduced to the type of ways English is written on food takeout containers. So that was one of the concerns. There's some other issues with representation as well. Next. The second is in our characters, and actually it was in the theming. So our characters in the theming, Ninja Kitchen was, we do a lot of user testing and a lot of bringing our target audience and when you develop. And at this time, 13 years ago, ninjas as a theme was huge. It was coming out in all the movies. It was huge. So when we went to kids and had them co-design with us, this was their top picked theme. And it was fun. And we thought, yeah, this is really popular online. Let's have some fun with it. The problem is this: ninjas were very real people in a very specific cultural context and historical that actually existed. And we took it, and by cartooning it, by applying this theme to something else, again, we reduced the specific cultural approach to something that was not related to that. And while there might be space to play with ninja themes and to put cartoons and things into that, it's not my culture. It is not my place to be able to do that with that. So that's why we wanted to change that as well. And then the third, it was just in terms of accessibility. We know more now how to make web-based delivery more accessible across the spectrum. Next. Okay, so I want to share first just some guiding principles, our thinking and how that has changed. Next. The first is this. Next, we are on a spectrum of need and we have multiple identities. What do I mean by that? Next. Okay, we look at accessibility needs along visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive. And it's not that you have a visual issue or you don't. You have a hearing or you don't. It's not. We are on a spectrum. You can tell I'm wearing glasses. I'm certainly in a spectrum between perfect vision and less than perfect vision, right? Hearing, we are on a spectrum. Our motor, our ability to control things, our cognitive abilities to understand, all of our users, everybody you're reaching with your educational materials are somewhere on a spectrum, and we do the best we can to reach wherever we can on that spectrum. Next. Similarly, everybody has multiple identities. We have our age, our gender, our race, our ethnicity, how we view ourselves professionally, our maybe faith or other sorts of belief systems. So there is no one type of people. We all are on a spectrum of needs and have multiple identities. Next. As Jim mentioned earlier, we like to see people who are like us. This is one of the biggest shifts in my thinking. I used to approach it as we are going to design for the normal user, and then where we can, we're going to collect everybody else. Next. But here's what has changed for me. This is the normal. It's no normal user, or at least we're all, not normal in equally important ways. So this shift in thinking helped me change from we're going to hit the norm and then we're going to be nice people and reach others. That's not it at all. My approach now is how can I understand all of the variability and design the best of my ability within that. Next. All right, so what we came up with as a framework that I wanted to share with you, this is evolving, this isn't finished, we still meet weekly as we're kind of changing some language on it, but I'll share with you what we've got now. And this is our framework to help us think of the 4 areas to really design inclusively. Next. The 4 areas now, we'll probably change them, is team, what our team looks like, who's creating the products. World building, what we show to people, this world we show people in our animations or what we choose in our photos. Intent and inspiration, where our ideas come from. And then access and support, how we distribute it and how we share it once it's done. Next. So team building is really professional development of our team members and support. Do we have a culture of inclusion? Can anybody on our team bring up concerns? Who are our employees? Do we have enough diversity? Do we need to bring different people in on different projects because we don't have specific herds? Can we bring in a consultant to bring in other people? How can we take all the people we're in our team and help raise their knowledge level of all of these issues? That's a huge thing in and of itself, but looking at the team that is developing our materials. Next. World building is what intent and inspiration, great. So intent and inspiration, you gotta look at the origin. Who decides what the problem is? Who decides what the solutions is? What are their needs and where are our biases? In the great chicken washing debate of how we all share information about it, this is probably the biggest revelation I feel our industry has had, and that is going back to those groups that we've been difficult to change their behavior and better understand the why. That has changed our core messaging. Next. Access and support is how people get access. How do we promote it? Do we sell it? Do we not sell it? Do they have the technology they need to access it? Is it in the language they need? Can they access it based on their cognitive, visual, hearing, motor needs? When we are getting ready to share it, what is the best way to share that information with them? And then finally, world building is what do the characters look like? How are they drawn? Who do we show? What are skin tones, representation? What are the stories we tell? Next. So for the representation, we try to avoid an inclusive design, a checkoff list, because it's not that simple, but it does help to have examples of what we mean when we say representation. So we look across the characters of all of the things that we develop, because you can't have a zillion characters that represents everybody in a given product, but we try to say, what are some people that are not being represented in everything we do? So every year we revise these with our better understanding. This is on our website if you'd like to take a look at it, our values, DEI, and accessibility. And this is when we talk about representation. Where's the spectrum of all the people we're trying to make sure are represented in the materials that we develop? And there's a QR code if you want to shoot it, or you'll get the slide and you'll have the URL. Next. Okay, so some examples of where we're at this year from understanding. This is a food safety material we're preparing to help people who rent out commercial kitchens or spaces to prep their materials. You can see just by glancing at it, see the diversity in the names, see the diversity in the skin colors, hair types, people, how they look, how they are presented, their clothing, their vestments. Also, you'll notice the underline first, that's an accessibility issue. That shows users who maybe can control with one finger using keyboard control instead of mouse, how they can navigate easily if they don't have full capacity of navigating in a web space. Next. I showed you Outbreak Squad earlier. I wanted to highlight one of our characters here is in a wheelchair. There's no reason for that character to specifically be in a wheelchair. It's just a normal person that's part of our team. So we worked a lot and workshopped ways to get a diversity of characteristics, of hair types, of interest, facial expressions, and body shapes when we only had the 4 characters here. Next. Fightback.org/poultry. And if we can, at this point, I'd like to go watch, it's a 1-minute animation, which was one of the things we heard that could sway people on chicken, which is they didn't like the goo that came on chicken. And shouldn't we wash that goo off? So we addressed that issue with this animation. Let's watch it and I'll tell you about our characters. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll just tell you what's happening. So we have two characters here. They're talking about what's that goo? And the other person is very persnickety. And the person cooking is like, it's just goo, it's saline. It's saline water. If it bothers you, take a paper towel and towel it off and then throw the paper towel away. But you don't have to wash it off. The seasons are going to stick better anyway. And then the person's like, oh, what's that green stuff? And the cook is like, Steve, those are vegetables. So we were trying to kind of play on the idea of the grossness that is goo, but explain what it is in a fun way. Okay, you look at our characters here, you may not know this, but these two characters are in a relationship. One is bisexual and the other is homosexual. That has nothing to do with washing chicken. Absolutely nothing. This gender identity and this sexual orientation has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not they wash their chicken. However, when we look at the characters that are presented across, we realized there were certain people who never got to see themselves on screen. So then we said, how do we present a diversity of characters across all of our materials in a way that's just representative of all of us everyday normal people living our normal lives? So the animation had things like photos in the background that kind of share to you that this is a home that these people share, the way their hair is done, the way one might put his hand on the other as they're talking. So there's a lot of ways to convey representation without being expressly blatant or specific when you're naming characters. Next. All right, so to bookend Maya Angelou's quote, we are going to look back at our work and we're going to realize we get it wrong. And that's what growth looks like. So this is something I say in our studio all the time. We move forward, we do the best we can, and we're not going to shame ourselves when we got it wrong, when we didn't have enough representation, when we maybe used the wrong origin story. That if we can tell we got it wrong, that means we're smarter now, and that's the goal. Next. I know we're a little late on time. Please put those questions in, and my email is here if you want to reach out to me as well.
Thank you so much, Barb. So we are running a little over, but if attendees are willing to stay on for another 5 to 10 minutes, we can have a short Q&A session with all of our speakers. So let's look at this first question. The first question says, and this can be directed to whoever feels that they can answer this. It says, do you have or know of publicly available testing data or information or feedback for various audience regarding food safety and public health education and communication? Anybody?
We don't. When we do our user testing, we keep it internal for our thing. So I don't have any publicly available data on that.
Okay.
We don't either, but we're planning on publishing, but you know that takes a while. So we don't have any data available just yet.
Okay. Okay, so the next one, can you please share the contact information again for the CDC? Yes, Deborah, you will receive a set of the PowerPoint slides, and everyone's contact information will be on there. Let's see. Kelsey, yes. Okay, so this is addressed to Kelsey. It says to Kelsey, yes, 1-800-222-1222 connects callers around the US to their local poison control center. Poison center data is also used to detect outbreaks, so better utilization is a double bonus for public health. Local poison center educators like me also do varying amounts of food safety education in their communities. And that was from Wendy.
Yes, Wendy, that's a great resource. I have bookmarked it, so I will talk with our team lead to see if we can add that to some of our pages where we, in the blurb where we're regularly talking about reporting foodborne illness already. So thanks for that.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I don't see any more questions in queue. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up then. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Next slide, please, Michelle. We're just going to close out the webinar with just a few reminders from the partnership about upcoming events and programs. So as we all know, September is National Food Safety Education Month, and the partnership will be holding a fun bingo activity where educators have the chance to win some fun prizes. So keep looking out for that. October 15th is Global Hand Washing Day. And of course, we will be promoting all types of resources you all can use in your outreach. And also mark your calendar for November 1st, because the partnership will be holding another webinar on flower food safety. So those details will be coming soon. And we'd like to thank all of our community connectors for making our events such as this webinar and also our other events like conferences and things. These folks help make those events possible, so thank you. We also would like to thank our contributing partners as well as our federal liaisons, but because without your help, we wouldn't be able to get this work done, so thank you. And if you would like to support the partnership's efforts, we would love for all of you to stay involved with us. Please think about making a $10 charitable gift to support our food education work. Also, if you're able to, become a contributing partner. We also urge you to follow us on social media so you can share our food safety messages, and also sign up for our e-card and our monthly newsletters. And a final reminder about CEUs. They have been included in the chat box throughout the webinar, but we will also send you a follow-up email tomorrow where you can access your CEUs. You can also visit our webpage. And a reminder that if you are seeking NCHEC credits, you must complete the online questionnaire by Tuesday, October 17th. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We have received such great information, and please feel free to reach out to any of our speakers with additional questions, or reach out to us at the partnership if you'd like to know more about our resources and ways you can get involved. And so that wraps it up. And we thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.